Liz Wheeler. We are live across all social media platforms. We're live right here on X. We're live on YouTube. We're live on Rumble. We're live on Facebook. By the way, we have video on Spotify now. So if you haven't already, head over to Spotify, search for The Liz Wheeler Show, and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us with discoverability. Other people discover the show when you subscribe. So please do. And if you would, also leave us a 5-star review over there on Spotify. Huge news today. Huge news. And I'm like repeatedly checking my phone even as we go live because it has just been drip dropping all day. Bombshell new emails that were declassified by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. That would be the office run by Tulsi Gabbard, of course. These emails were released by Senator Chuck Grassley, and the contents of these emails reveal that Hillary Clinton personally approved the Russiagate plot as a quote unquote distraction from her own email scandal. It is plain as day in these emails, which we are going to read together. It's funny, isn't it, how Hillary Clinton was kind of the side character the last couple of weeks. We were focused on the role Barack Obama played and the role John Brennan played and the role Gina Haspel played. And we said, well, what about Hillary Clinton? She's the one who commissioned the Steele dossier. She's the one who invented this plot. Can she face charges? Well, now we're finding out that she personally approved this. And the reason she approved this was because her own email scandal threatened her candidacy for president of the United States. Plus, speaking of John Brennan and James Clapper, they're scared. They're really scared today of the charges that they ought to face for attempting to defraud the United States government and violating your rights to stage a coup attempt against the president of the United States with information they knew was false before they used it, simply because they didn't like him. John Brennan and James Clapper are so scared, they have run to the New York Times. They think the New York Times is going to provide cover for them because that's what the New York Times always does for the left. And they've written an op-ed together. It is chock full of lies. But what really got me, the lies are easy to debunk, and we're going to go through that in a moment. But what really got me is the horrible gaslighting that Brennan and Clapper engage in aimed at you. Joining me today on the show is a very special guest, Hans Mahncke. He's a lawyer, an author, and he is one of the individuals who has been reporting tirelessly on Russiagate for the past 9 years. Can you believe this has been going on for 9 years? Hans, good to see you. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me. Great timing.
It is. It's the 9-year anniversary today of when Crossfire Hurricane was launched, right?
It is, and it happens to be the day when they release all these bombshells as well.
You have to wonder if that's a coincidence or if that's some kind of poetic justice. Let's start with the Brennan Clapper New York Times op-ed first before we get to the Hillary Clinton stuff. The Hillary Clinton stuff may be a bit juicier, but I think that this joint op-ed between Brennan and Clapper show that what Tulsi has declassified and released to the American people is right on the money, and that they're worried that they're going to face actual justice. So the title of their op-ed is "Let's Set the Record Straight on Russia." Okay, boys. In it, they lie. They claim that they did not use the Christopher Steele dossier as the foundation for their manufactured intelligence community assessment, the one that they invented after they didn't like the real one. And they also engage in what I consider to be just hideous gaslighting. This is the part that really got me, is they claim, guys, you misunderstood. Our intelligence community assessment never even made the allegation that Trump colluded with Russia. The allegation was just that Putin tried to meddle in our elections. And we never made the claim, they say, that Putin impacted the outcome of the election. We just said he tried to. This stuff, Hans, is just beyond.
Well, I mean, you make a really good point because why are they defending against charges that haven't been made? I mean, no one accused them of inserting this accusation of collusion in the ICA. It's not in there. No one said it was in there. And yet now they're saying, well, we didn't put it in there, therefore we're innocent. It's ridiculous. It's what's called a straw man argument, where you come up with an argument the other side didn't make, and then you defend that argument, and then you say, well, look, here, I didn't do anything wrong. The other argument they make along the same lines is that they didn't leak anything before the 2016 election. Here, look, we didn't leak anything. I mean, two things about that. First of all, no one accused him of leaking anything before the election. It was always after.
Right.
But also the other thing is, well, if you didn't leak before the election, what about after? I mean, what does it say? You didn't deny leaking stuff after. So I have to say, it's a very poorly written thing. It was obviously written in a rush. And my takeaway is the same as yours. They must be genuinely concerned about what's coming their way.
Yeah, and did you notice who they threw under the bus in the middle of this too? I want to read this paragraph. It's actually kind of funny. I'd love to see James Comey's face behind the scenes. This is what they write. They say, first, the so-called Steele dossier, a series of memos, now largely discredited. Oh, now largely discredited. Okay, boys. About purported Trump-Russia links written by a former British intelligence agent. Ms. Gabbard and Mr. Ratcliffe have claimed it played an integral role in formulating the assessment. We have testified under oath, and the reviews of the assessment have confirmed that the dossier was not used as a source or taken into account for any of its analysis or conclusions. They say at the Federal Bureau of Investigation's insistence, this is another way of saying James Comey did it. A short summary of the dossier was added as a separate annex only to the most highly classified version of the document that contained the assessment. That annex also explained why the dossier was not used in the assessment, end quote. So Hans, react to this for me, because not only are they throwing James Comey under the bus, which I find to be hilarious. I hope this does form some kind of circular firing squad here. Rat each other out. Rat each other out. That's what we're waiting for. But also, they deliberately made different versions of this assessment, if I'm not mistaken, to brief different people in order to hide the paper trail that they did, in fact, use the Steele dossier as the basis for it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There were three different versions, and so now they're playing word games in terms of, well, it wasn't in there. And if they were ever pushed, obviously a New York Times op-ed is not subject to the laws of perjury, so you can't really sue them for or prosecute them for the lies in that piece. But if there was pushback on that, they'd probably say, no, we meant the other version. And they sort of conflate the whole thing. But I smiled about the Comey thing as well. It's fantastic. They threw him under the bus, but obviously it also threw Christopher Steele under the bus, which I love basically just as much when they say that the whole thing is discredited. Wow, if it had just been that, if we weren't where we are now, if you think back a few years and you have the director of national intelligence, Clapper, and the CIA director, Brennan, both come out and say that the dossier is a bunch of garbage. I mean, that in and of itself would have been huge news. And here they just kind of throw it in a word like, oh yeah, well, it's discredited.
Yeah, now we know, they say. Now we know, even though it was the crux of this entire thing. So they go on in this op-ed. They claim that they did not pressure any of the analysts in the intelligence community who said, hey, we don't have any evidence of Russia favoring Trump. We don't have any evidence. Last week, by the way, Tulsi Gabbard declassified documents that showed that John Brennan personally refused to include that. He personally overrode the warnings from top CIA analysts who told him there's no evidence that Russia played this role. And in this op-ed, he says, no, that's not true. We never pressured any analysts who said there's no threat for Russia. And yet Gabbard today, probably in response to this, declassified testimony from a whistleblower who said, actually, yeah, I was an intel officer and I personally was pressured to go along with this bogus ICA. What do you make of this?
Yeah, Margot Cleveland over at The Federalist had this big exclusive yesterday on this, where she exposed the fact that this whistleblower had come forward and, in fact, had been pressured by Clapper not to insist on the truth, to just basically be quiet and let it go away. And you're absolutely right. The document released last week by Tulsi Gabbard, which was the House Intelligence report, which had been kept hidden for 6-7 years, that has a whole litany of documented examples, not just hearsay or whatever, actual documented examples, proof of Brennan overruling these so-called intelligence professionals. I say so-called because the media loves, talking up these people. Oh, the intelligence professional said this or whatever. And in this case, the intelligence professionals were saying, and it's on the record, that there was no particular plan on Putin's part to get Trump elected. If anything, he would have preferred Hillary. That was the actual intelligence from these, vaunted intelligence professionals. And yet here we have Brennan now saying he never overruled them. And that's just a flat out lie. So we've known since last week, again, this is documented, that he overruled them. In fact, there's a snippet in there in last week's release where they say the intelligence professionals say, this has never happened before. We've never, ever had a CIA director come in and tell us to cast aside the actual intelligence and replace it with something he came up with, fabricated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that's some positive reflection on the intelligence community if it's never happened before, although not exactly a first-time experience we want to be we want to be so fortunate to have had imposed on us. I think this elevation of intelligence analysts is the same sort of, trust the experts thing,
Yeah.
right? If they have this intelligence analyst title, then the mainstream media tries to say that they are unquestionable, which is exactly the same. It's technocracy. It's rule by the experts. And I and everyone watching this show today rejects that. I think too, one of the things that you said about, you write an op-ed in the New York Times and, that it's not subject to perjury laws. That I think is something that's going to come back and bite Brennan and Clapper. I think that's a very good point. And by the way, a little bit later in the show, I want to ask you what exact charges both Brennan and Clapper should face, because there's been a lot of questions and I've been among those asking the question. Okay, so we see the things that they did and we can see the unethical things that they did. We can even see things that we can point to that look illegal, but that's a very different, that's sort of like a lay person analysis. I want to hear a legal argument for what specific statutes they violated. And we're going to get to that in a moment, but I want to talk about something really weird that it happened over the course of the past 24 hours. It's this weird, fishy media operation that a lot of the mainstream media seem to fall for. There's this woman by the name of Susan Miller. She's this really strange kind of like frumpy boomer looking woman, and she's gone on all these mainstream media outlets claiming that she is the one who wrote Brennan's phony ICA. You'll remember from last week, it was revealed that this was so highly compartmentalized as part of Brennan's operation that there was only 5 CIA analysts involved and 1 primary author. Well, this kind of strange woman, we're going to show you a video in just a second because she's really weird. This woman has been claiming that she was the one who wrote Brennan's phony ICA. And my first reaction when I saw this, it was a little bit of a surprise, to be honest, because she's totally insane. This is a video of her talking about these allegations that Putin helped Trump. Take a look at this.
Did you question any of the sources that
she's the one in the middle, obviously
cited?
Oh, that I can't remember.
He basically only had one real source.
Yeah.
The guy who was charged in the Durham investigation and acquitted, but it's not like there was a network of sources.
Yeah,
that
FBI
were
doesn't ever
up.
have a network of sources. They will
Right.
get, and they are really
But this
good.
was Steele, not
Steele.
the FBI.
Oh, Steele, yeah.
Steele,
Yeah.
his. Yeah.
No, but at the same time, I look back now at the Steele dossier and I'm wondering, did we miss something?
What do you think?
Maybe.
Why do you
anything? Something in
why do you
particular
look
that
back
gives you that
now?
view?
But because Trump wants a 3rd term, anti-constitutional. Trump originally wanted to take away any kind of help for the Ukrainians, which favors also Putin. Trump is acting at a minimum like a dictator, and he's acting like Putin. And so that's why I'm reserving my thoughts on that now until I can figure out if there's any more information out there.
Okay. So this woman has been making the rounds claiming that she's the author. She's the one author of Brennan's ICA. And I got to tell you, Hans, my first reaction to this is she strikes me as one of these kind of loser boomers who probably like moonlights as a really tyrannical, like petty tyrant homeowners association rules enforcer or something like that, who writes mean comments on Facebook groups. Like, it's hard for me to believe that this woman had that significant of a role, and yet CNN and NBC were all running with this story, and it turns out that this crazy spook lady is lying. Tell me what you know about this.
It's such a weird story. I mean,
It's
first
so
of all,
weird.
I agree with you. She's just not very bright. You know,
No.
that's a huge problem. Even if we assume that this stuff wasn't made up, that this wasn't a Brennan fabrication and all that kind of stuff, wouldn't you expect, if you accused the sitting president of the United States only to be in his position because of Putin? Putin got him there. That's a pretty big accusation with all kinds of consequences flowing from that. So wouldn't you assume that the people tasked with looking at such an accusation are kind of moderately intelligent, that just
I mean,
as a
one would
minimum,
hope.
that's the first thing. So even if we cast aside all the fabrications and so on, just that woman, and I agree with you, I always assume DC is filled with these kinds of people. And so, just the last part of what you just showed there, just the TDS has completely rotted her brain. There's no question about it. This video is just from a few months ago. I think it's just 1 or 2 months old. This isn't like back in 2017 or something. So this woman totally still believes the Steele dossier, or at least she thinks, there's probably something there. When even, as we just discussed, Brennan and Clapper now say the whole thing is discredited. It's a shame that they have these kinds of people doing this kind of work. Now, as to whether she actually did it, that's sort of the next step here. Now it kind of turns out, or some people are saying, well, she didn't actually write it. So, but then the media, they trotted her out last week and this week and said she's the author. And it's a very, very strange situation. And it does seem like some kind of psyop where they just kind of, they wheeled her out like, here, the media, listen to this woman. But again, I'm thinking, doesn't anyone in the media have like a functioning brain, or at least like half of a functioning brain, where they go like, no, we're not having her on. She's just not credible. This woman is going to make our case worse. Anyone who looks at her for 10, 20 seconds, has seen enough.
It's mind-boggling. And by the way, huge kudos to Joe McKinnon here at Blaze Media. He was the one that broke this story, because this woman apparently, she is a former CIA employee. She is a former spook. I don't think she's employed by the CIA anymore, at least as far as I know. But she reportedly was an author, although not the author, of another report that had to do with Russiagate. And she claims now that she's been corralled and asked more specific questions by real journalists, she now says that her report was used in the writing of Brennan's ICA report. But that's a pretty significant difference to me. She is not the one author, even if some of her obviously Trump derangement syndrome saturated thoughts were used to inform Brennan's ICA.
We don't know how much she had, how much involvement she had. Now it's also been reported that she had involvement in writing the Mueller report.
Yeah.
So I've seen that out there too. It doesn't really, to me, it doesn't even matter whether it's 10%, 20%, whatever, 100%. It doesn't matter. These kinds of people shouldn't be anywhere near any of these kinds of very serious issues. And again, just assuming that there's something there. We know that it's all fabricated, but let's just like pretend the game of like, oh, this is intelligent. We need to analyze and we need to report and so on. What are people like that doing anywhere near this stuff? There's another video of her where she talks about having lived in Moscow once, and she bought a toaster. And it was horrible because Russian toasters are horrible. And that must have somehow completely messed with her. And she's hated Russia ever since or whatever. I'm making it up. I'm not making up the toaster story. But that's the sort of caliber of person you're talking about, where they go to Moscow and they have a bad experience with a toaster, and it kind of infects the rest of their
now Trump
thinking.
is friends with Putin because her Russian toaster malfunctioned.
Correct,
That's about the level of analysis I would expect for her. Listen, honestly, my takeaway, because when I saw this reported, I, like many others, was like, oh, wow, she's the primary author. Yikes. My initial reaction to it was, in a sense, you don't want someone like her, obviously, anywhere near what's supposed to be an unbiased intelligence community. You would also hope that someone writing with any kind of writing responsibility would be more intelligent. At the same time, it actually tracks to a certain extent that Brennan, who wanted to be the one creating this, would have someone who was so gullible, who was so dumb, who would serve, in a sense, like a patsy to exactly how he wanted that ICA to be manufactured. So in that sense, I suppose it kind of makes sense. Although at this point, I don't know how much of a role or not she played in that ICA, although she said she briefed the Senate Intel committee about her Russiagate report. So she did do something significant.
Yeah, I don't want to digress too far, but she reminds me a bit, I don't want to be too unfair to Peter Strzok, but she does remind me a little bit of him, where he wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer either.
We'll tag him so that he hears.
No, absolutely. He definitely wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. And yet he was head of counter-espionage for the FBI, the entire organization. And he was tasked with this Trump-Russia collusion investigation. Again, the whole thing was a scam. We know it was a scam and so on and so forth. But let's just pretend for a moment, we're going to have a serious intelligence investigation, whatever. What on earth is that man doing anywhere near such an investigation. So it does seem to be a problem where not only is this stuff made up, but they also involve a lot of people who just aren't very bright. And you're right, these people can be manipulated. In Strzok's case, we know he was terribly manipulated by Lisa Page, his alleged paramour over there at the FBI, where she kept texting him, oh, we can't let Trump be president and you're going to stop it and whatever. And he was like, yeah, of course. He was the knight in shining armor. So I definitely think she was the bright one in that relationship. But again, the overarching question, and this goes beyond Russiagate, goes beyond anything we're talking about here today, just the broad issue of why are these kind of people with just who are just not very smart, in charge of all these things? Why are they kind of at the center of all these things? Why are they writing these reports? Again, I don't care how many percent she wrote or whatever involvement she had. She clearly had some involvement. She clearly did work for the CIA. In Strzok's case, we know he was the head of counter espionage. There's a lot of these kinds of characters around. I mean, I could name names like
Brennan.
Alton at the
literally,
FBI.
Brennan is one of these names. In 1976, he voted for a communist, and in 1980, the CIA says, "Okay, no worries, we'll hire you." What? What? Also, fun fact, I looked up Peter Strzok's X account right now because I was going to tag him in this live stream, and he has scrubbed his account. It has 0 tweets, nothing, blank. I think someone else. But, someone else besides Brennan and Clapper are frightened. Okay. Oh, Paul Sperry, by the way, also reports that this woman, Susan Miller's daughter, currently works in the Trump administration. Just to bring that to the attention of the Trump administration, because you may want to look into that, because it doesn't seem like someone who would be in alignment with the America First agenda that we voted for you to implement in the White House. So, Hans, move on to the bombshell revelation of today. Senator Chuck Grassley released the declassified Durham Report Annex, which included an email that specifically referenced Hillary Clinton's approval of the Russiagate plot, but for approval for a very specific reason. Walk us through this email.
Right. So I think we have to start off by saying that this is not a sort of a direct verbatim email that the U.S. intelligence picked up from Gmail or one of those kinds of things. It sort of came via an indirect path. And so the path is that the Russian intelligence had picked up or had hacked, or whatever the word you want to use, but we don't know the details. And this is confirmed and it has been authenticated. And and you can see that in the document that came out today. Anyway, they got a whole bunch of emails from for instance, the Open Society George Soros Foundation, and then the Carnegie. There's another one of these NGO type things. And so they had access to a whole bunch of these emails in 2016. And from these emails, they were then able to deduce very quickly that Hillary Clinton had a plan to smear Trump with Russia collusion. And so you cited one of those emails. There's a few of them in there. But just to say that, to begin with, that these are not emails directly from the server. These are emails via the Russian intelligence, via some other intelligence, which is supposedly the Dutch intelligence who picked up. So the Russians were watching the Soros Foundation and the Dutch were watching the Russians, and that's how the thing, all this came back. So just that to kind of start off with.
It's a terrible game of telephone.
Well, to a certain extent, but what the important thing, and you're showing one of the emails there, the important thing is that the FBI said this was authentic, the CIA said it was authentic, and this guy that you've got here, Bernardo,
who is that?
He worked for George Soros. And so what this shows is that there was a connect, that at least the George Soros people knew of Clinton's plan to smear Trump with Russia collusion, and they knew it before the FBI ever opened their investigation. You see the date there, July 27th. So this was 4 days before the Peter Strzok and the FBI opened their investigation. So FBI thought it was authentic. CIA said it was authentic. John Durham, the special counsel, asked this guy Bernardo, and he said, well, he can't really recall. And he said he said it was in his email, but then he didn't really say so. He said he had some qualifying words in there. You can pick out the words in the report somewhere as to what exactly he said. It was like, well, to the best of my recollection, or I don't
very
really
James
remember,
Comeyism. I don't
something
recall.
like that.
Yeah.
And I would always say, if you wrote an email like that, it's a yes or no. This is so explosive. This is a yes or no question. It's not like, well, I don't really recall or whatever. So that, along with the fact that these other agencies authenticated it or said they think it's real, kind of, I think we can safely say, work on the assumption that it is real.
It's like a preponderance of evidence. At this point, it's more likely to be true than not. Let me read the beginning lines of this so that you can break it down for us. So it's from Leonard Bernardo, sent July 27th, 2016. And it says, hi, comma, HRC, Hillary Rodham Clinton, approved Julia's idea about Trump and Russian hackers hampering U.S. elections. That should distract people from her own missing email, especially if the affair goes to the Olympic level. The point is making the Russian play a U.S. domestic issue. Say something like a critical infrastructure threat for the election to feel menace, since both the president and the vice president have acknowledged the fact that the intelligence community would speed up searching for evidence that is regrettably still unavailable. However, the email reads, there seems to be some signs that the GRU penetration or to be signs GRU penetration, they appear hardly skilled, incompetent, bumbling idiots, as somebody called them. In absence of direct evidence, CrowdStrike and Threat Connect will supply the media, and GRU will hopefully carry on to give more facts. Now, end quote. So I'm reading that verbatim. There's obviously some grammatical issues there. Break down. First of all, who's Julia? Do we know who Julia is?
Well, supposedly she's a Julia Smith or Julianne Smith, who's a Clinton campaign advisor, foreign policy advisor.
So it was her idea about Trump Russia, this false narrative.
Supposedly that was her idea. She cooked it up, and in fact, when Durham doesn't name her, but names that person foreign policy advisor too, and when he talks about that person, he says the person did admit that there was something afoot, but again, trying to, just as with this guy Bernardo, don't really recall the details and that kind of stuff. So when they talked to Durham, they were trying to hedge. Now what it tells us is that Hillary Clinton approved this plan where they would smear Trump with Russia collusion. And one of the things in terms of authenticating this, we really briefly talked about that. But one of the points I would make is all of the stuff that's in here, including the CrowdStrike stuff, which we can get to here in a moment, was going on in real time, where the Clinton campaign was pushing all this stuff in real time, in public. We know, for instance, her campaign manager, Robbie Mook, around the same time, was out on CNN saying that Trump and Russia were colluding. So all the stuff that you're seeing here as the Clinton plan, well, they can deny that they had a plan, but their actual actions in real time totally match. They totally align with everything that's in here. So of course they had a plan. CrowdStrike is an interesting part of this. So they say that this is very interesting. It says that the email says that CrowdStrike is this IT company that was called in to supposedly look at the sort of cybersecurity aspects of the DNC hack in June of 2016.
And that was when emails from the DNC were hacked and we weren't sure exactly who the hacker was.
That's right. And CrowdStrike was supposedly there as sort of IT professionals. But from this email, it looks more like they were Clinton campaign operatives who were basically just there to push the narratives into the media. And again, that completely aligns with what we know, what publicly happened. So for instance, very early on, before any of this was even, no one was even talking about Russia collusion. Nothing was going on in that sense. No one had talked about the DNC hack. All of this was completely fresh in June of 2016. The Washington Post, Ellen Nakashima, ran a piece saying that the Russians hacked the DNC. And who were the sources for that piece? It was CrowdStrike, and it had two top executives from CrowdStrike giving Nakashima all these quotes. So I have to conclude that this was part of that plan. And again, here it says that the plan is for CrowdStrike to push this into the media. Well, we have the article. We have the Washington Post.
It says in absence of direct evidence.
That's even worse. I agree.
It's even worse because that just says, okay, if there's no proof, then they're going to go ahead and plant their narrative with the mainstream media.
Exactly. And so those two people told the Washington Post, oh, yeah, this was the Russians. And then when they were asked, or one of them was called to Congress under oath and so on, where perjury matters. And he was asked the same question. He was like, well, we don't really know. We basically have no idea who hacked the DNC. So that, again, shows you that the public version that they put out in June of 2016, CrowdStrike, was to seed this idea with the media that there was Trump-Russia collusion, starting off with the DNC hack. And later on, when they were asked about actual evidence, well, they didn't have any. So what I'm trying to say, overarchingly, we can get into a lot of details here, but the whole point is Clinton and the media and all these people are now going to claim, well, we don't really know. This is just a Russian leak. We don't know if these emails are real. No one's good. But the point is, the emails say that there was a plan by Clinton to smear Trump with Russia collusion. And it lists various aspects of that plan.
Yeah.
And in real time, if you look at, again, what CrowdStrike did, what Mook did, what Clinton herself did, what Jake Sullivan did, he put out a message at the same time. They all did exactly what the plan said they would do. So, of course there was a plan.
In a sense, this email is actually just extra evidence. Like, we can look at their actions and determine what they did and what crimes they committed without this email. This email just makes it easier to prove that there was intent behind this and it wasn't something that just grew on itself, that it was a plot that they then put into action. Which brings me to the $1 million question. I was making fun a little bit of, and I was among the people that I was making fun of here yesterday on the show, because there's been so many people that are like, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say exactly which statutes these individuals should be charged under and what those charges should be exactly. And I was making fun of myself because I said the same thing. I was like, well, I'm not a lawyer, but even though I'm not a lawyer, I can give you a list of possible statutes because I can critically think and I can read. You, however, are a lawyer. And so I want to ask you today, when you're looking at these different people, from Obama to Brennan to Clapper to Comey to Andrew McCabe to Peter Strzok to Lisa Page to Gina Haspel, people that we can, in bullet point form, list exactly what role they played in Russiagate, how they lied, what they did wrong, how they plotted to subvert the government, how they put that into action. Can you walk us through some of the likely charges? Because I got to tell you, there's a report by Paul Sperry that is confirming some of my fears from last week. And I hope this isn't true. He's a credible reporter, but I hope that this is not what's going to happen. He posted, when was this? This was yesterday afternoon at 3 p.m. He said, new FBI investigators plus DOJ prosecutors weighing conspiracy to commit perjury charges versus John Brennan and James Clapper aren't just examining their oral testimony, sources say. They're also looking at written answers they gave to dossier questions from the House Intelligence Committee. And I got to tell you, Hans, I said last week, right after Tulsi Gabbard declassified that House Intel report, I said, I do not want to see piddly little perjury charges, a slap on the wrist, essentially, for these people who attempted to stage a coup attempt against a duly elected president using false information that they knew was false and weaponizing the government against us, we the people. I want serious charges. I hope that this report from Paul Sperry, I hope that it's not my fear coming true, that they're just going to get a slap on the wrist and piddly little perjury charges. I also looked it up this morning, by the way. The penalty for conspiracy to commit perjury, the maximum penalty is 5 years in prison or a $250,000 fine. And the average federal sentence for conviction under that statute is like anywhere from 0, like 6 months confined to your house arrest, or like a year in prison. It's a slap on the wrist. But what do you make of this? What can these individuals be charged with?
Yeah, I would start off with not the what, but the where. I think the where is the most important thing in all of this, because if the idea, and this would be absolutely terrible, but I that's kind of my fear here. If the idea is to charge them in Washington, D.C. or across the river in Arlington, so that's the Eastern District of Virginia, you might as well just not charge them at all. In fact, I would say don't charge them, because it's just going to make it worse, because there is no way a jury in those places is going to convict these people. It's just not going to happen. And we actually have a perfect example of it, because John Durham, special counsel, stupidly brought a case against Clinton's campaign lawyer, a guy called Michael Sussman, and he brought it in D.C. And the guy was basically laughed out of court, Durham was. And the jury foreperson, after the verdict, came out and said that, well, we're not going to convict this kind of guy. It's just ridiculous. Why did they even bring these kinds of charges? Lying to the FBI, bring it here.
And it was like a cut and dry case, too. Like, there was no doubt that he lied.
Of course, there was he had we had a text message on his phone. I mean, of
Yeah.
course he did. What he did is he was. By the way, this ties in with what we talked here a few minutes ago. He was part of the Clinton plan. He was pushing this fake intelligence into the FBI, which is exactly what one of the other emails in today's drop says that would happen. And like a couple of weeks later, he did exactly that. And he was caught red-handed. And the Washington, D.C. jury just said, haha, we're not going to convict this guy. I mean, it was just, it took an hour or whatever, and they just laughed the whole thing out of court. And that was the end of it. So now, and of course, now he can say, well, you know, I'm acquitted, should have never been charged, blah, 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 you know. And this is exactly what's going to happen if you bring charges against any of these people in D.C. And I would say the same applies to across the river, because it's just a mile or whatever. And it's the same kind of people up there in Arlington. So whatever charges there are, I think that's secondary. The first point is it cannot be in those jurisdictions. It simply cannot be.
Is there a way to avoid those jurisdictions? And if so, how?
There are many absolutely. There's many creative ways, but it just seems that Democrats are much better at using these creative ways. I mean, we all remember Douglas Mackey, the meme guy, right? He sent this meme. He had nothing to do with Manhattan or New York or anything like that. No connection at all. He lived in Florida or whatever. They charged him up there because they knew they would get a friendly jury who would convict him, which is exactly what happened. And the way they tied it in was like, well, his Twitter feed was being read in New York, hence, you know, we can charge him there. Well, all these crimes that these people committed, they affected the people in Oklahoma, in Texas, in West Virginia. I mean, take your pick, right? With Mar-a-Lago, we have a direct link to Florida, where it's more than the people there were affected. There was actual activity at Mar-a-Lago. Of course, the raid, we're talking about the August 2022 raid down there, which many people say is connected with finding all these documents which are coming out, where they feared that Trump might have his own personal copies, and they wanted to make sure that, you know, they take them away from him. I don't know if that's really true or how much of that is true, but there you can definitely create angles to go to Florida or any of these other places. So that would be my, you know, overriding priority. Make sure you do it in the right jurisdiction. Otherwise, just don't do it at all.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of the charges, I agree with you. The perjury, or the lying to the government in some form. This is the 18 USC 1001 charge, which we've all heard so much, because that's the one they used against all these Trump associates. They used against Flynn, they used against Papadopoulos, and so on. Papadopoulos did in fact go to jail for 2 weeks, as you say. This is the sort of the average you get for that kind of charge. I guess it would be nice to kind of get them on something, anything, but I agree with you that that would be disappointing if it was that. I mean, the one that probably applies the best is the conspiracy against the United States one. That's a very broad one. And what it basically entails is you are hindering the government in its normal legal function. You are somehow impeding the government from functioning. So this is very broad, but you can definitely fit it to these facts, because what these people did, like say, let's take Brennan, for instance, when he made up that fabricated intelligence which went against what the actual intelligence said, namely that Trump was only elected because of Putin. That ruined Trump's presidency. That came out before Trump was inaugurated. And from that day forward, all the media ever said is like, oh, he's only president because of Putin. I mean, that was a huge, huge problem for Trump throughout his first term. They never expected him to do this, you know, immense, incredible comeback. But, you know, that's a different story. So they ruined his first term. That is impeding the functioning of the U.S. government. So this is a very easy way of fitting it into that particular statute. So that's the one I would go for. And that one has a particular advantage as well, aside from being able to fit the facts very well. It's the fact that it's a conspiracy statute. That means that any time anyone did anything to further the conspiracy, you restart the clock. So with all these federal charges, or almost every single federal charge, there's a 5-year time limit. Not a 5-year time limit from when you first found out about the crime having happened. No, from when it actually took place. Now, most of the things we just talked about are like July 2016, December 2016, and so on. So that time limit has run. You know, we're way beyond 5 years. Can't do anything about that. Can't bring charges. But once it's a conspiracy, the clock keeps resetting. Every time any one of these conspirators does anything to further the conspiracy, to hide the conspiracy, to conceal what they did, you know, any kind of what they call overt act, the clock starts running again. So it's very easy to, for instance, Brennan had testimony in Congress in 2023. And in that testimony, he absolutely, definitely tried to conceal this conspiracy. So where the 5 years started again then. And so
I mean,
we're
would the New
looking
York Times op-ed even count towards that, since they're trying to cover up with this op-ed, they're trying to cover up what they did?
Yeah, I mean, you run into the problem of was it, is this kind of a private act? And by the way, they say in the first line or second line or whatever, we're just private people saying this. Yeah, I mean, you could make that argument as well. But I think we have plenty of kind of official or under oath acts, specifically talking to Congress in the past 5 years, that would easily extend the clock. And then the other beautiful thing about conspiracy is you don't have to reset the clock for everyone individually. As long as one of the co-conspirators, in this case Brennan, does an overt act, it applies to all these people.
Oh, interesting.
There's also something called that ties in with this, that's called Pinkerton liability, which is where if you were involved at the outset, like say in Obama, July of 2016, he knew that this was a Clinton plot, and he told his intelligence officials to go after Trump. I'm just sort of truncating, but just to simplify. We need to find out more details of what he actually said when he found out about this Clinton plot to smear Trump with Russia collusion. But that goes back to July of 2016. Let's just assume Obama never did another thing. Okay, so it's been 9 years or whatever. Well, because he was part of that original conspiracy, again, assuming that he said something to the effect of what I just said, then anything the others did in the meantime would also count for Obama. So he would be dragged into that as well, even if he had nothing to do with that. You have the sort of the famous analogy of the bank robbery where, you're just a getaway driver and you didn't even know there were guns involved and you just wanted some money. But then people get shot and other horrible things happen. Well, you're liable for all of that, even if you were just a getaway driver. So that's kind of roughly what we're talking about here in terms of pulling in people like Obama and others who may not have been, acting any overt way for the past, 8-9 years. Well, they'd still be liable given what they did to begin with.
What about the immunity thing, executive privilege or the presidential immunity? President Trump actually referenced last week, he said Obama's going to be hard to get because of the Supreme Court ruling in my favor on presidential immunity. And he, quipped that Obama has him to thank for that. Is there any way to hold former President Obama accountable for this?
It's very complex. I mean, it was the same kind of when they went after Trump. And then Trump invoked immunity. And then they were kind of splitting hairs about, well, it doesn't apply to ththings you did after you left office and this and that. It's a minefield. It's very complex. But I think Trump is playing this exactly right when he said that, what you just alluded to, that he said, well, Obama might get off because of immunity. I think, just looking at it legally, Obama would probably get off just based on facts, because at every level, at every stage, at every interaction, he always has this deniability. He can always say, well, I just did what Brennan said. I just followed what Comey said. By the way, Comey and Brennan cannot do that, because if Brennan says, oh, I just did what the intelligence professional said, well, we have proof he did the opposite. He suppressed what they said, and he did the opposite. So Brennan doesn't have that excuse. But at Obama's level, who's obviously a rung higher in the hierarchy, he does have that excuse, because Obama never dealt with some, analyst at the CIA. He just dealt with Brennan. So he can always say, well, I just did what Brennan said. So he can do that for pretty much any interaction. So realistically, I don't think there's any hope of really coming after Obama. So from a narrative point of view, in terms of framing it, I think Trump is doing a really smart job by saying, well, we're not going to go after Obama because of immunity, which of course then the lingering stench is, well, Obama did do all these horrible things, but we can't go after him because of immunity. Perfect. I love it.
So in your opinion as an attorney, and I find this to be fascinating. You're actually the first person that I've heard to go over specific statutes and basically the risks or the possibilities, the chances of conviction, assuming for a moment, and I know this is a big assumption, but assuming for a moment that this is in a court that's fair, not Virginia, not DC, a court that's actually looking at the elements of the case and of the statute, what would you say the percentage chance of conviction for Comey, for Brennan, for Clapper, and for Gina Haspel too? I mean, I want to talk about that. Maybe that's even separate. When she defies the order of the White House to release that House Intel report that she was in custody of at the CIA. Like, is that not subversion of the president of the United States? Can she face charges? And if so, again, you can answer together or separately. Like, what, in your professional opinion, is the percentage chance of conviction should the higher charges be brought against these individuals?
The overarching point is that with every single one of them, you always have to ask yourself, what's their excuse? And the excuse is always going to be to blame some underling. What we just talked about, that Obama can just say, well, I just did what Brennan said. And if you go through those people, the only one who doesn't have that excuse, and it's documented that we know of, is Brennan. Because we know of the document that was released last week, which is the House Intelligence Report, which again, it has the footnotes, it has the exact words, it has the extracts, it has the documentation. We can prove that Brennan defied these professionals. He defied the advice and he went the other way. There's a very interesting footnote, and I wonder whether that was put there kind of on purpose for someone now to pick up and run with. And that footnote says that there were reports that Brennan didn't want to get published. So even though the process within the CIA is that you file them somewhere and then then they're somewhat part of the record, he stopped that from happening because those reports went against his narrative. They were that Putin did not want to get Trump elected, so he didn't want those in there. So
it was
instead,
like 14 of them, right?
Well, that's right. But he picked out 2 or 3 that he didn't. The footnote basically says he picked out a few that he absolutely did not want on the record.
Yeah.
And completely unprecedented what he did there. And again, it's proven that it's documented. So there you are talking about actions on his part, which he cannot blame on some underling. The underlings actually wanted to just follow the process and put this thing in the record, and he didn't want that. So that's very, very bad for him. Overruling his professionals in terms of their assessment that Putin did not want Trump elected, said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do the opposite. That is something he cannot blame on anyone else. Now, as for Comey, I think he's kind of smarter than Brennan. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but we saw that play out, in 2017 after he was fired.
He's a wily character, is how I would describe him.
Very, very slimy, weaselly. It's just that kind of it seems to be his nature. Yeah. Anytime he said anything, like there was that one time, it was during COVID, I think it was September 2020, he had been called to Congress to testify about all this stuff. Everything was, I don't recall, I don't remember, and you really alluded to this earlier. He is going to be harder to pin down. Again, all of these people are looking for someone else to blame. That's always going to be the same modus operandi, which, by the way, is why it's so difficult to nail down mafia bosses, because mafia bosses always have underlings, and the underlings have underlings of underlings, and you work your way down the chain.
It's literally the analogy that I made earlier in the week. I was calling Obama the boss and Brennan the underboss, and Gina Haspel the enforcer, because that's how this whole conspiracy was structured.
Correct. And with Haspel, Haspel's a very interesting case as well, where obviously she was right at the center of when all this started in July of 2016, because she was the CIA station chief in London, sent there by Brennan. How on earth she got to be Trump's CIA chief, anyway. And she then referred this fake tip from the Australians to about this Trump advisor called Papadopoulos, which then supposedly kicked everything off. But the whole thing was just a totally, just feeble crap. She was the one who referred it. I can't say I know that was that she was part of a plot or whatever. I don't know, but it's very notable that she was there at that time. Very, very strange. But we do know what you said here a few minutes ago, that in 2020, when all this stuff was supposed to come out, and John Ratcliffe was the DNI at the time, and she was the CIA chief, she suppressed it. She made sure it wouldn't come out. Now it's 5 years later that we have to, wait for an additional 5 years. Now, can she blame her actions? We don't know the details of her actions because all the documents haven't come out yet, but can she blame that on some underling? Can she say, oh, the underling told me we can't release this because of this and this? Or is it more like Brennan, where she personally made that decision, and the fact that happened is documented? Maybe some underling took some notes. Maybe an underling sent themselves an email at the time saying, Gina Haspel refused to release, or whatever. Having an email from the time would be fantastic. So I think in her case, we don't know enough yet. I think you mentioned Clapper as well. So I said Comey, Weasel, probably not going to be. He's probably just going to weasel his way out of stuff. Yeah, this guy Clapper.
Even for the FISA stuff, well, hold on just a second. I want to talk about Comey for a second because I mean, obviously he's a weasel. He's such a wily character. He pretends ignorance all the time as a way of not allowing himself to be on record saying anything culpable in any way. But what about the fact that he was aware that the Steele dossier was fake and he used the Steele dossier as justification for the FISA court warrant against Carter Page? Can he not be held accountable for that?
Yeah, that, and as I'd say what is perhaps even worse is briefing Congress. So after he knew that the whole thing was fake, the so-called primary subsource, this guy called Igor Danchenko, the guy whom Steele used as his patsy, like, oh, I don't know. Steele said, I don't know anything. This is this Danchenko guy who told me. Well, the Danchenko guy told the FBI in January of 2017 that this is all just gossip, rumor, made up, just drunken bar talk. These are the kinds of terms he used to describe it. So at that point, the whole thing collapsed. And yet, Comey not only signed off on these FISA warrants, but in my view, even worse, he then went to Congress and just outright lied. He just said, no, this source is super reliable, and yeah, this has all been, or most of it has been corroborated, and just total lies. And as we just found out from last week's drop, the one that we keep talking about, the House Intelligence drop, he lied to Reince Priebus. So Comey went to the White House in February of 2017. And by the way, lying to Reince Priebus is lying within, the sphere of the U.S. government. So absolutely perjury.
He was chief of staff at the time. Reince Priebus was.
Correct. He was chief of staff. And Reince Priebus, probably a bit of a soft character, but at least I think he was trying to do the right thing, going, directionally. He was correct. So he said, hey, Comey, what's going on? What's with this Steele dossier? Why the hell is that? Why are you even talking about it? It's just garbage. It's rubbish. And then he told Reince Priebus all the same lies. No, it's been corroborated. Oh, no, the source is super duper trustworthy and so on. All the things that he knew to be lies. Now, how is he going to wiggle his way out of it? Well, first of all, he's going to wiggle his way out of it by saying, oh, this is more than 5 years old, what we talked about earlier. Okay, can we make it a conspiracy? Maybe, because we can say, well, he was conspiring with someone else to advance these lies, and hence the clock was being reset and so on. But I would just be... I'm just a bit pessimistic as far as he's concerned, because even with the lies to Reince Priebus, given what we know about Comey, given what the sort of operator he is, I kind of expect he has some excuse already lined up. It's like his brain works overtime figuring out how he's going to cover for himself. So yeah, no, when I told Reince Priebus, it was actually Peter Strzok. Peter Strzok told me beforehand, or just something, whatever. Blame some underling. I just assume he's always got some kind of excuse. Whereas Brennan, what we just mentioned earlier, he just did it in a more kind of clumsy way, and it's documented, and that's very bad for him.
I still think we should try to get Comey, because Comey was also he didn't just brief Congress, he also briefed the president on. I mean, it was Comey who briefed the president. I think it was January 7th of 2017. So when President Trump was President-elect Trump, he briefed him with that fake ICA, and then he leaked it to CNN. This is when the media firestorm about Russia collusion started, because of Comey briefing Trump with that fake information.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I'm not saying he shouldn't be charged, or that I don't want that or whatever. I'm just assessing the kind of probabilities here. So out of all the people you mentioned, I think Brennan is by far in the most trouble, just because of what we know. And again, this is based on what came out last week. Now, I don't know if there might be other documents to do with Comey that are equally as bad. That would be great. We just don't know if they exist. And my prediction is that they don't exist, because Comey is just...
Because he's smart enough to cover his tracks.
That's right.
Right, yeah. There's not going to be rocks written on the beach that say, I did it, from James Comey. He's gonna be a little more wily than that. What about Clapper?
Yeah, Clapper is one of those that I assume is just not that smart. He seems to be more of, even though he was supposedly the nerve center because he was the director of national intelligence. So he was supposedly... by the way, that position was created after 9/11 to sort of pool all the intelligence that we all know what the right hand knows, what the left hand does, and so on. But if you look at how this story unfolded, if you look at the documentation that came out, in particular, again, I keep talking about the House report from last week, which is so powerful. Again, that was Kash Patel and a few others, Derek Harvey and so on, who were behind that one. Really, really great work they did. if you look at the details of it, he just doesn't seem to figure very high. I just think he was just sort of this figurehead DNI, and they would just use him to push their narratives. Yeah, James do this, James do that. But I never get the feeling that he was driving any of these hoaxes. He was he was kind of Brennan's appendage, even though I guess he was Brennan's boss as DNI. I don't know, but but given that he was Brennan's appendage, I would say he's probably number 2 on my list of people who are in trouble, because he did do a lot of stupid things. Like, again, he went to Congress and talked about the same stuff that he talked about in yesterday's op-ed about, no Steele dossier and this and that. And so by parroting whatever Brennan was saying, I think he's himself in quite a lot of trouble. The distinction I would make is I don't see any evidence of him kind of driving this. It's really more of a Obama, Brennan, Comey driving it, and he was just kind of there, probably not very smart about it.
Well, being complicit makes you equally culpable. Listen, I'm going to say what I said before. I hope that report from Paul Sperry does not give us the holistic view of what the Department of Justice and what the FBI are working on right now. This cannot end in piddly little perjury charges. It cannot. The American people are going to roar louder than you've ever heard them roar before. I mean, especially in the wake. I mean, all of this seemed to happen. The declassification of the House Intel report by Tulsi Gabbard happened on the heels of the Epstein files scandal. And I don't think that timing was a coincidence. I think that the White House understood that the reason why Trump's base cared so deeply about the Epstein files was because it represented to us, or it represents to us, justice. We voted for Trump because we want justice. We want justice for COVID. We want justice for January 6th. We want justice for Russiagate. We want justice for the phony Ukraine impeachment. We want justice for the FBI weaponizing the government against parents who didn't want their children indoctrinated with critical race theory and trans ideology. The FBI calling arresting pro-lifers for praying outside abortion clinics, for calling Catholics domestic terrorists and violent extremists. We want justice for all of these big things. And we haven't seen justice for the big things yet. Not that the Department of Justice hasn't done some good stuff. They have. I support what they've done so far, but for the pivotal things, we haven't seen justice. And so the Epstein files started to represent justice to us. And when that became the debacle that it still kind of is, DNI, Tulsi Gabbard released the Russiagate stuff, and we are rightfully focused on this because it actually is more important than the Epstein files, which is kind of the point of the argument all along. But the American people, President Trump's base, are not going to be satisfied by piddly little perjury charges. We're not going to be satisfied to see John Brennan go to jail for 2 weeks, like you mentioned George Papadopoulos did, because he is convicted on a perjury charge. It's just not going to cut it. Sometimes people tune out of the news for so long, they might even miss the fact that Brennan went to prison if it's for 14 days. They want actual accountability. And I feel like it's a big question mark in the sky. It remains to be seen if we're going to get that from President Trump's Department of Justice.
It does. Now, unfortunately, there's one tiny little thing, which is, to me, not so tiny, but that I always think of in respect of like what's really going on and how many of these kind of Obama people and so on are still working there, and how many of them are kind of hampering the process. And so there's a strike team which is supposedly looking at this, but we don't know who is on that strike team. And I would say it's extremely important to have someone on there who is fearless, who is not influenced by anything else, any niceties or any of these Obama appointees or whatever else is going on. We talked earlier about that Susan Miller, who was obviously in the CIA. I mean, how many Susan Millers are there in DOJ right now? Probably a lot.
A lot.
How many of them have something to do with this particular issue right now, trying to prosecute these people? I don't know. I hope none, but I don't know what's going on in terms of the personnel. But one thing I do know, and that is very frustrating, is, very few people know that there is still a Mueller case that is still being prosecuted right now. And it's just unbelievable. I honestly thought on January 20th, this year, that at least that can all be done now. No more Mueller cases, no more of that rubbish. And they're still prosecuting a Mueller case. I think that's probably because no one's aware of this being, this going on. This is in the FARA section. The FARA section is apparently still being run by the old guard, the guy who brought the case. Why is that the case? I don't know, but that's the name that I've seen. And probably just no one knows that this is still going on. And when you have examples of that, you have examples at the FBI. People complain that one of these January 6th kind of pursuers was promoted in a high position or whatever. I mean, you've got a lot of these examples throughout government. And I don't blame President Trump, and I don't really blame his administration, because you've got so many people. You've got so many Susan Millers all over the place. But in terms of this, as you say, this is important. This was a coup against the president. And I hope they follow through, and I hope they have the right people, to use Obama's term, on it. But
Yeah.
I also hope
Ironic.
they end this Mueller witch hunt. Just end it. Why do you still have Mueller cases in 2025?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you phrased that correctly, that sounds like a small thing, but it's actually not a small thing. And I think a lot of people aren't even aware that those are still happening. Well, I said this last week, and I think I have to say it again. This is Pam Bondi's big test. She failed with the Epstein files, and she has a chance. I don't know if I would use the term to redeem herself, but she has a chance to do something, which if she does correctly, I will be the loudest person giving her credit for actually enacting justice if she does it correctly. This is her chance. And we're waiting with bated breath to see exactly what the Trump Department of Justice will do when it comes to Brennan and Clapper and Comey and Haspel and McCabe and Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and all the rest. There's about 25 names, at least, of people who should face charges. Hans, thank you for your dogged reporting on this. I mean, happy anniversary, I should say. 9 years you've been tracking this stuff down, reporting accurately, better than probably any other journalist that I've seen. Or, I mean, I said this to you before we went on air. There are like 5 journalists who have been working their tails off for 10 years, tracking this down, who have done excellent work, and you're one of them. And I really respect that. And I know that we're all here on the Liz Wheeler Show very grateful for your work. So thanks for being on the show too. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that too. Thanks so much.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, there you have it. That's the breakdown that we've been waiting for about which Obama crime crew crony should face charges and which charges they should face. I mean, post this on your social media, tag the Trump administration, because Pam Bondi's Department of Justice might need just a little boost in filing the right charges in the right place against the right people. So go ahead and repost this episode everywhere that you can to get as much attention to that breakdown as possible, because I have not seen any other attorney, especially somebody who has also served as an investigative journalist in this case, so really knows the bones of this case, be able to break it down as expertly as Hans did. I will say it does give me a little hope. I do feel optimistic, maybe even more optimistic than Hans was expressing. I do feel optimistic that given what we know, there should be charges greater than perjury. And not just because I want them, not just because you and I can sit here and say, I recognize something bad when I see it. I recognize that what Obama and Brennan and Clapper and Comey did to President Trump was wrong. That's true. But also, when you match the facts of their behavior and their actions and their choices and their intent with the law, it shows that they violated the law. So hold them accountable. Hold them accountable. Ronald Jacobs in the live chat says, Liz, I think when you look closer at the original Tulsi drop, it shows that actually James Clapper was apprehensive, but Brennan was a full-blown cheerleader of the lie. Yes, I think that's mostly an accurate way to describe it. I don't know if apprehensive. I mean, listen, did he do the thing is the question. I don't care about his feelings about it. Did he do the thing? James Clapper did the thing. So even if he was as dumb as Hans said, even if he was a patsy, even if he didn't invent the plot, even if he wasn't the underboss like Brennan, who was tasked with carrying it out, he played a pivotal role. Had he acted with morals, had he followed the law, had he put his foot down and said no, had he publicly talked to the media and said, listen, none of this is true, and contradicted Brennan, none of this would have happened. So I don't care if he was apprehensive, if that's an accurate word. I don't care. He still did the actions that allowed this to take place. Therefore, he should be held accountable to it. Farouk Ahmad in the live chat says, hey, Liz, this has got to be the most interesting interview you've conducted so far. Great stuff. Yeah, I thought so too. Thank you for the compliment. Although I think the compliment should go toward Hans. That's why we're over an hour now. Because I lost track of time because he was so fascinating. Like I said, he has been working on this for 9 years. 9 years of his life has been dedicated to this, and he's been right on, I think, all of it. All right. Before we go, again, please make sure you subscribe to Spotify. Search The Liz Wheeler Show. Hit the subscribe. Leave me a 5-star review. Greatly appreciate it. But let me just say this. We are not done. Not even close. The left thought that when they weaponized the federal government, the deep state against us, they thought that we would stay quiet, that we would give up, that we would let them abuse us and then reshape America without any resistance. But they were wrong. We are committed to this fight, and we are winning. It's not just a slogan President Trump says. We actually are winning. More and more people across the country are waking up. People who 4 years ago were woke now are casting their votes for Republicans. They're seeing through the lies. They're recognizing the damage that the Democrats have inflicted on our country, and they are yearning for and returning to truth. And we are not backing down. On The Liz Wheeler Show and all across Blaze TV, we are holding the left accountable. We not only name the issues for what they are, it's important to be able to identify by name the enemy that you face. We debunk the false narratives, and we play offense. We bring you the truth that the media won't touch. We drive the news by demanding accountability and justice from our government. Supporting Blaze TV is not just about a subscription or about content. It is about being part of a movement that's making a difference. It's about saying no to the chaos and saying yes to truth and freedom and values and getting it done. It's just $8 a month when you use my promo code Liz. That's $20 off the annual plan. For you math nerds, that's 26 cents a day to support voices that are speaking up when it matters most. Listen, you're the lifeblood of this movement. It is a partnership, you and I, to work towards reclaiming the America that we know and we love. So go to blazetv.com/Liz. Join us today. We don't need to shout louder. We need to stand stronger, and we're doing that best together. blazetv.com/Liz. blazetv.com/Liz. I had two other interesting pieces to share with you on the show today, but we have so wildly run overtime. I have so wildly run the clock overtime that we will have to save them until Monday. But let me tell you, they're good. They're really good, and I'm excited to share them with you. So make sure you tune in Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern to The Liz Wheeler Show. Subscribe on youtube.com/Liz Wheeler, x.com/Liz_Wheeler, or blazetv.com/Liz. Thanks for sitting here with us today during this live stream. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.